Okay, hello everyone. We'll just wait a minute or two for other attendees to join. We're going to start in 2 minutes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Annie. I have Matt with me. It's 10:30. We still see some people logging on, so we'll just give them about 30 seconds, and then we'll get started. So welcome.
Very good. And if someone wants to do a quick ping in the Q&A or chat to confirm that sound is working great, that'd be much appreciated. We're pretty sure we're good, but that would be a nice...
Awesome. All right. We're seeing some...
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, so we'll get started then.
Very good. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for this webinar today. Very quick introduction. I'm Matthew. I'm the Managing Director for DDI in Canada. My background is as a organizational psychologist coming from Quebec City. That's where you get the accent. But now based in Toronto and traveling pretty much every week or so across Canada. My expertise in the topic we're going to be approaching today is that I've got probably 15 to 18 years of consulting experience, conducting assessments, putting together acceleration programs, conducting feedbacks, development sessions. And in the last few years, what I've done mostly is work around program governance to help make sure that there's the proper steps in place and that our clients putting in place acceleration programs for executives or emerging executives have the right ducks in a row to make sure that there's progress and process tension and the kind of impact that they're looking for. And I'm here with Annie today.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Annie Frama. I am from Montreal. And like Matt, I'm an organizational psychologist working now out of the Toronto office in DDI. So I have over 20 years of leadership assessment and development expertise. And I'm currently the practice lead for the coaching practice in Canada. And interestingly, Matt and I have known each other for what, 15 years now?
Yeah.
We used to write assessment reports together back in the day where you had to actually write pages and pages of reports. So we have similar background as well. And so today we're really delighted to be with you to share our experiences, but also best practices from consulting with some of the very best firms in this space to help you move from good to great and hopefully give you a few ideas along the way. And so we'll talk about how world-class acceleration programs have evolved to better supply ready executives for accelerating business demands. And also we'll look at some innovative practices that help ensure relevance, impact, and sustainability of investments. And finally, we'll give you some examples of business relevant leadership development that's tailored to both individual and also cohort needs on topics like evolving a coaching culture and also driving faster digital transformation. And today with us, we have Diana, our marketing guru, and she'll be helping out with any audio or technical issues that you may have. And she's also going to be monitoring the Q&A. So if ever you have any questions on the content for Matt and I throughout our session today, you can certainly send them through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be answering that for you as we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. Just going to switch this. So very quickly, many of you will know us and some may not as much. So I just want to do a quick intro for DDI as a global consultancy. So we are a global consulting organization specialized in leadership development, and we're doing this across all leadership levels from frontline to senior executives and CEO level roles. We specialize in building programs that are online and offline that have multiple components to drive sustainability and the kind of impact clients are looking for, as well as succession management to help drive development for critical roles and families of roles. Today, what we're going to be focusing on is the level that, so here are some examples of titles, but it's essentially that mid to senior level in organizations where we, some organizations would define them as vice presidents, some would call them senior directors, general managers. So we're essentially talking about how to drive development and building bench for individuals who are leading leaders, who may also be leading another stratum of leaders. And they're often in charge of a P&L, or if they've got a significant portion of budget responsibility or growth objectives. So that's the audience that we're focusing on today. Annie?
All right, so let's get started with a bit of context. So we know that the lifespan of companies are getting shorter, but how short are they getting? So when we looked at some research from Yale University, we saw that the average lifespan of a company in Standard & Poor was 60 years in the 1950s. And today, just 18 years. So that's significantly lower, as you can see. And according to InnoSight, half of the Standard & Poor 500 will be replaced over the next 10 years. So bottom line, there's very little time to get it right. There's new business forces that have changed the roles of executives, and I'm sure that you're seeing that in your organizations today. We've planned a few pulse checks today to see where you and your organizations are at. So let's go to our first polling question. So this is a polling question, and you'll see on your screen the different answers. We're going to ask you to chime in here. The business forces that most significantly affect executives in your organizations are which ones? Is it digital transformation, disruption, new expectations, speed of change, or all of the above, or none of the above? So we'll give you a few more seconds here to chime in and let us know where you are at. All right, so we have about half of the respondents. We'll give you a few more seconds here. And so far, a lot of you are all of the above, not too surprising. All right, so let's end the polling in 3, 2, and 1. There you go, you can see the answers here, share results. Awesome, so we have 63% of you that are at all of the above, not too surprising. All right, let's go to our second question here. All right, so back to the polls. We have a second question for you. All right, so the effect of the business forces that we've just mentioned on executives in your organization is from 0, minimal, substantial, or massive. What is the effect on your executives? So again, we'll give you a few seconds to chime in. You know the drill now. All right. Okay, so 5 more seconds here. Okay, and let's close the poll. All right, so substantial roles and expectations are changing significantly. So not too surprising, that's what we've seen so far. You can see the results here on your screen. So for most of you, all of the forces are in play and the effects are substantial. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide. Okay, so let's start talking about those forces, and we actually will be talking about all 4 of those. So for the first one is digital transformation. So it was in the media constantly from, I would say, maybe 5 years ago, but actually few organizations were picking up on that trend. So as long as their competitors weren't jumping on the digital train, organizations could afford to wait. but waiting is no longer an option. So companies as yours are, I'm sure, are advancing rapidly towards that digital transformation. And in the last year alone, we're noticing a great shift, even in our clients, right? Moving from those early stages of the transformation to the later changes. But the issue is most leaders are not ready to make the shift, right? And if you look on the bottom right-hand side, you can see that according to the head of Walmart Labs, 70% of their leaders won't be able to make the transformation. And so ask yourself the question, in your organizations, is that the case? And it is for most of our clients. Now, the second force is disruption. So to compete in the world today, leaders have to become familiar with the unfamiliar. And when you think about it, the world's largest taxi company owns actually no taxis, right? Uber didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. The largest phone companies own no telecom infrastructure when you think of Skype or WeChat or Zoom. And the largest accommodation provider owns no hotels, right? So we've gone from a world of Hyatts and Hiltons to hotels.com, from a world of Walmart to Amazon, right? And so the digital world has made it much easier for companies to be disrupted in the blink of an eye. So right now, your company is either in one or two positions. You're either that slow moving organization who's vulnerable to disruption, or you're actually actively trying to be the disruptor. And either way, it creates that tremendous pressure on your executives to create that environment of agility and innovation. And really, there's no industry that's immune to disruption, is what we're seeing in our experience. Now, our third force here is new expectations, right? And when you look at the landscape currently, to compete, leaders have to quickly adapt to changing workforce demands, right? Most of you here in the room are likely in HR, and you're seeing this every day. You're noticing that employees require more transparency and communication. They want less hierarchy. They want faster responses. They want more connection, and they also want an environment that's more team-based. And lastly, the fourth force that we see is the speed at which all of these changes are happening, right? And so it really is happening at breakneck speed, which means that to compete in the world today, leaders have to both perform and transform simultaneously. These mindset shifts have to happen quickly, collectively, and at the same times. And as you can see, all of these changes are compressing executives today. And what that means is that there's a lot of pressure on leaders. Their plate is full and they're struggling to meet the challenge. According to Harvard Business Review, 50 to 60% of executive transitions fail within the first 18 months. That is huge. And according to the Corporate Executive Board, if leadership transition is successful, there's a 90% chance that the team will go on to meet their 3-year goals. But on the other hand, if the transition is unsuccessful, that leads to 20% lower employee engagement. So again, it is significant whether the leader is able to meet the challenge or not. The impacts are huge. Now we have a third question for you. So let's go to our polls. I'm becoming an expert at this.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
So in your organization, how well are executives coping with these new business forces? So very well, mostly positive, mostly negative, or very poorly. We'll give you a few seconds here to vote. All right, we have more than half of you. This is awesome. You guys are getting super fast on the polling. Okay, so let's end our polling here and show the results. Okay, so we have mostly positive. That is awesome. Most are doing well, but a few are struggling. Okay, awesome. So we're going to be able, hopefully today, to share some tools and tips with you to help you guys out there. Okay.
I think we're good. Awesome. Thank you, Annie. So at this point, we're going to turn our attention to some of those practices that have been employed around the world and obviously in Canada to drive succession. So as we get into this, I know this is something that's going to be very familiar to many of you, but actually may also be interesting for some others. I just wanted to set the table here when we talk about succession management and these three concepts. So there's a concept of performance, that is how much the person is performing in his or her role. Potential, which is essentially about how much can the person drink more Kool-Aid or develop and then soak it in and then create value out of the investments you're making in that person, so that person can actually grow. So see it as investment potential. And then readiness, it's the construct of being actually ready to take on a more senior role and actually being ready to take on that executive role if you're considered to be an emerging executive leader. So these are things that often get mixed up out there. Just wanted to level set on this as we start. First place I'd like to go is a place of what tends to happen in organizations who are kind of, I would define them as being somewhat laggards in how they approach acceleration for talent. It is still something that's going on often, but it's basically taking a more planful approach. So often mandated by the board of directors, you need to come in with a succession plan for your top executive positions, and then you need to present back this beautiful contingency plan on what is the succession and path and critical, how you are going to plan for critical transitions and all of that good stuff. I would say this is not what we're going to be focusing on today, but I find that many organizations still take that stance. And as it relates to emerging executives, what they would do is cascade down that process across leadership levels to then include senior directors and VP level roles. And when you take a step back at this, what you're essentially doing is you're doing all of this effort of planning what are the positions, who's the successor for that role, who could be the backup successor, who's N-1, who's ready -2. And then what happens is that the world goes on, the world changes, people change jobs, people get poached to go somewhere else. A new senior executive comes in, makes some different decisions for who could be actually a successor for herself or himself. And then all of this effort, all of this investment in planning and strategizing and documenting ends up being somewhat of a vain bureaucratic exercise. So what I'm going to be talking about more now is tackling it more from a pool perspective. And when I say a pool, it's taking a step back to think about what are essentially the critical capabilities that we need as an organization to drive the business forward. What are those critical skill sets and mindset that we want to drive in our culture as we evolve? And then taking a step back from that linear, planful approach that many organizations still take, and sometimes you'll still have to take it because you've got a need around reporting and having some kind of data point that you're presenting back on this. But just be aware that that's not going to give you the kind of results that you need based on the speed at which the world works and the speed at which your organization is changing. So what we're going to be talking about here is taking that step of looking at what are the job families that we need. And I'll have an example coming up shortly, which is maybe looking at, do you need more general managers, or do you need more senior directors to be able to take on a business line? Do you need more process engineers who in your structure would be seen as mid-management, given the size of the scope of what they need to be responsible for if you're in manufacturing? And based on that definition of those critical capabilities, and based on how likely is it that you're going to fill those roles internally with the current bench that you have versus having to pay expensive recruiters on the outside to basically buy talent out, then that's going to give you a really good base to strategize where do you want to start with your acceleration programs. So here I'm going to get into a poll, and I'll try to do this as well as Annie was. Poll number 4, launch polling. So I've got a few typical practices that organizations would be taking. So the first one is planning for succession only at the C-level for senior level positions. So that's what I was talking about with reporting back to the board. We plan succession for executive roles. So GM, VP level, you could probably fit in senior directors if your structure is a bit more flat. Then we have acceleration pools to generate a pipeline of emerging executives. So taking a more of a broader stance at capabilities and building this bench that could be applied in different contexts based on the business. And then all of the above, and then none of the above. Just gonna give a few more seconds. So there's a good distribution, it seems. Very few people have those acceleration groups. Some are only at the C-level exec. Some have, okay, I'll, and polling, share results. So you guys should now see this. So here's what we have with this group. Basically, as you see, there's definitely a mix. There's definitely a lower quantity of folks having an acceleration pool. So it'll be interesting in the chat if you want to come in with some questions around how to set that up and do this intelligently. So we can definitely help. However, as I'm thinking about it, if 10 have all the above, that means that they've got it too, right? Mm. So yeah, so there's a decent size of the audience there. So this is just to get a sense of where we're at. I think you guys will be interested with what's to come in this case. Just gonna close this and then keep going. So one key aspect of defining your acceleration program, and I'm gonna try to stick it to the theme of emerging executives here because that's also the data we have in front of us. We did some assessment, some analysis around assessment data we have as it relates to succession management assessment centers. So think of it as data from day in the life simulations where we pressure test people to take on a more senior role and trying to figure out what's the delta, where do they have gaps. And what we've done is, because we've got so much data, we've done some analysis with the companies that were part of that pool, and then looking at how their performance compares based on how their leaders and emerging executives compare in terms of capabilities. So what you see here is just a data point around the fact that on the left-hand side, we are seeing a high level of difference and a high correlation between having higher capable leaders and revenue growth. So maybe you guys won't be surprised by the fact that if you've got stronger executives, they're going to be able to drive the company, and then your company is going to be able to drive more revenue growth. But the point of data here is that it is worth taking a step back and making sure that you do have strong executives and you do benchmark their capabilities and then have a chance to pressure test who's going to be able to drive the kind of revenue growth we need. The piece on the right-hand side is a different vantage point. So this one is about the profit growth. So what we did is we assessed the degree through which certain competencies were predictive of having an organization that is driving more profit and growing that profit. Now, what I'm not advocating for here, as you look at what's in there, a lot of business competencies, driving execution, making good decisions with data what you have, entrepreneurialism, business savvy, which all make good sense when you think about strong executives that make good decisions and drive the business forward. What I'm not advocating for here is that the social skills like influence or emotional intelligence or coaching, that they're not important as part of your overall target that you have for those senior level individuals. What I'm saying is make sure that you don't just focus on soft skills. Have in your assessment, your benchmarking process, capabilities that you're truly pressure testing around the ability to get stuff done and then figure out strategy and how to execute on it. Because what you may end up having is a process that's very, I'd say, soft skills focused, which are important, but also don't forget the harder skills, because that's ultimately what's going to give results on the bottom line side of things. Here, what I wanted to talk about is more of a example of a well put together acceleration and development program. So this is just a visual to support this. The example I've got is with a large manufacturing organization. We're talking about an organization that has over 50,000 employees, multiple divisional general managers, and sometimes their title is divisional president. And essentially what they've done is they've taken a step back to look at what kind of capabilities are going to be required for individuals to be successful in those roles in general. So this is a talent pool approach. And then taking a step back to think about what are strategically as a business and as an enterprise, the kind of capabilities that we need to drive the kind of growth we need. So the client looked at the role, but also the broader strategy and the culture they want to shape forward. And what they've done is prioritize certain capabilities and certain business drivers that were going to be needed to be focused on for both the benchmarking step, which was in the assessment step, and then also the development. So what we've done with that organization is configure the assessment to make sure that we measure exactly those capabilities. So not just taking a generic all-inclusive stance, but really taking it more specific and tailored to the organization. And then because the pressure testing was very context specific and included both the soft skills and the hard skills, in that realistic simulation, participants, when they were at the step of getting their feedback on their capability, there was a very high degree of buy-in. So when you think about the critical path to make sure that your program gets stickiness, well, the face validity, the credibility of the assessment experience is definitely the number one critical step. And then when we were at the point of providing them with the feedback, what we did is we used an online platform to then get people working on their data. So it's not just getting a PDF. Many of you may, well, I'm sure you have programs to drive development with using one form of assessment or another, but think of it as what that client has been doing is using that online tool where people can get their data, play with their data, use their data with their coach to then put together a shorter list of capabilities that need to work on, and not just highlighting stuff on a piece of paper. And what we find is that's the second critical step in driving momentum and development, is having the chance to work with your data, play with it, and think through what's the relevance with my role, and have the coach be more of a Sherpa going through the data. And then what does it mean for development? Because the third critical step was agreeing on what is going to be of focus in individuals' development. So because we took a benchmarking approach with that client, and participants were highly involved with narrowing down what are those critical elements they need to work on, they put more investment in driving that development, and then there was more buy-in, there was more stickiness, and there was more business relevance. So that's just an example. When you think about the critical path from business to development, is making sure that you have this continuity, and then making it interesting for people, not just be a going to the shrink kind of event like what Annie used to and I used to do. Now, when you think about really good programs, and you think about your role as stakeholders who need to go back to your own stakeholders with data to help make decisions, and this is an example from that same client where they got back to their stakeholders. So in this case, it was a talent review committee with some senior executives attending, and then looking at the top individuals in a pool, and then looking at what kind of capabilities did those individuals have as it relates to executing on those business priorities, and then going back with data where you can think about, okay, so what does that mean for executing our strategy? What does that mean in terms of our talent pool? What does that mean for the bench strength we have? And then ultimately, what does that mean in terms of prioritizing group or cohort level development, and not taking a blanket approach, but really prioritizing the kind of capabilities that are going to be needed. And in this case, like as you see, there was let's say variance with different profiles, but there were some common themes with the kind of development that people were needed, and then they prioritized some group development from there. Another data point that we find adds a lot of value with senior sponsors for these kind of programs is data on how do we compare with the industry, or how do we compare against North American or global leadership bench. And then that helps having more of the outside-in take and not just saying, well, how good are we as we compare to ourselves or as we compare to competitors in, let's say just Ontario or Alberta or BC or Quebec, and then looking back at how good are we really and truly when we take an outside-in view. So in this case, the data was telling a story that was, well, we're awesome at driving influence, at making stuff happening, driving execution, driving innovation. So this was a very product-centric and innovative organization when it came down to defining those products and then driving execution out of that and being very lean on that. But they were ultimately very bad at doing this in a way that would take the customers and the market data into account. So that's the customer focused capability there. And also executives weren't strong at building bench capability in their BUs. So it was a bit more of a traditional organization that saw this as an HR responsibility, not as a leadership responsibility. But it was very powerful to take a step take a step back on, well, how are other organizations viewing the executive role as it comes to driving capability, driving talent, and making this a leadership responsibility? So this was an interesting data point for leaders to challenge themselves internally and seeing how do they grow and how do they grow their leaders, and then what kind of requirements do they have for leaders to own their part for driving succession. And then the talent COE was more of a partner to enable these individuals. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Annie.
All right, so we're just going to pause here for a few moments and see if you have any questions. Don't hesitate to send them to us in the Q&A.
Yeah. So there's a question around slides being shared after. So what we're doing is we're actually recording this, and we will send a link with the recording to everyone who registered. So thank you for the question, and yes, it's going to be available. But it's more than the slides. You get us talking too.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Bonus. All right. Anyone else? No? Okay. Don't hesitate at any time. Oh, all right. We have one.
We've got a question. So this is, okay, so in the example, what assessment was used? The assessment in that case is called Leader 3 Ready. It's a online behavioral simulation. If just imagining a big in-basket exercise that when done in person, it feels like a day in the life where you go in an office, you make decisions, you get emails, you get people knocking on your door. What this one is an online version of that with people calling in to deal with certain issues, but it was an immersive simulation that's designed for that level. So thank you for the question. So if we see public differences between private and public sector. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. You want me to answer?
Yeah, you can go and we can, yeah.
So the reality is we do a lot more work with the private sector. So in terms of our database, there is more private. We do have assessment and succession management with the public sector. What we find is that in the public sector, business acumen is different, financial acumen is different because there's not the concept of profit. It's more a question of governance around how budgets are being managed. In the public sector, there's also more requirements usually around governance. There's more requirements around capabilities tied to having this not necessarily market stance, but more what's the public going to say. So there's more visibility. So there, and I would say in the public sector we see a lot more skills around diplomacy, and sometimes more like politics, I'd say. So there's a honing of the skills around that. having said that, crown corporations in general, they tend to have similar requirements to businesses, but full-on government tends to be a bit more different. For what I find.
And I love your question, because I got exactly that question yesterday. I was facilitating a training session with a Crown Corporation, actually, in Ottawa, and I got that question, and it was a different assessment. It was the early identifier assessment, which measures, you know, different things. But at the same time, you know, the competency that we were looking at was driving results. And the question that I got from the participant was, well, you know, here it's a little bit different than the private sector, and you know, it's in theory it's interesting, but in practice it's not. But so then we had a discussion around, well, what does it mean to drive results? So the types of results that they may have might be different in those organizations, like in the public or the Crown Corporation, or the private versus the private, but you're still driving results. And same thing, even if you look at a nonprofit, for example, right? So you don't want to lose money, right? You may not be looking at profit, right? Because it's a nonprofit, but what does results look like for you in your organization? So sometimes it's kind of like translating what the competency is and what it means, or making decisions. So the types of decisions might be a little bit different, you know, in a public or a private, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Yep. Yeah. And we've got several more questions, but if that's okay, what we'll do is we'll go through the next coming topics, and then we'll come back to those questions.
Yeah, we'll circle back. We'll talk a little bit about development, then we'll circle back. We haven't forgotten you for your questions, but we will spend some time at the end. And so that way, if you have more questions, what we might do is maybe bunch them together and kind of have, you know, different answers for you guys. All right, so thanks. We're really happy to see that there are some questions from you. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit here about energy, right? So acceleration is energy. And I want to give you an example here of someone that I'm coaching who just got promoted. And so when I asked him how he felt about his promotion as an executive, he said, you know what, I'm 50% thrilled and I'm 50% scared out of my mind. So that describes, when we look at the research and when we ask our clients around the world, what does it feel like when you're learning at high speed? And so their responses really are consistent, saying there's really a mix of that fear and that excitement, of the worry, anticipation, right? And that thrill and that anxiety. And all of that generates energy for accelerated learning. So let me give you a personal example, and then we'll see how it relates. So how do we channel that accelerated energy into accelerated development? So at the beginning of the year, I decided to start working out at the gym. Yep, it was a New Year's resolution. And I got a personal trainer because really I hadn't been to the gym in like 15 years. And I was A, afraid I'd injure myself, and B, afraid I'd lose motivation. And so what he did is he assessed my physical fitness, he drafted my plan, and all I needed to do was show up twice a week to follow that plan with him by my side. Now, I didn't miss once because I saw progress. And I also had someone by my side who believed in me, who also counted on me to show up. And also I paid, right? So I had skin in the game. Now, the thing is, my trainer pushed me further than I would have pushed myself. And I can tell you because sometimes he went on vacation, so I had to train myself. And really, you know, I didn't push myself as much. And, you know, he also pushed me further than I thought I could go. He encouraged me. And honestly, I saw more progress in 6 months than I really would have in a year. And I did that without injury. So coming back to what does that mean for business? Well, to accelerate development, you need someone by your side to feel that mix of fear and thrill and excitement and energy, right? You need people by your side to push you and to push you further than you thought that you would go. And especially for emerging executives, because as we saw, the pressure is high and it's constant. And the world is accelerating at breakneck speeds and the stakes are high at that level, right? So emerging executives need support systems to grow at that speed and to be ahead of the curve. And what does that mean? Well, it takes a village, right? So that could be external or an internal coach or both, peer coaches, their leader, etc. So what we've found when we look at the differentiators of being a coach of coaches at that level, it's different. And when we look at, just to give you an example, a training program that we delivered and designed for emerging executives with one of our national clients, When we got to the coaching modules, the participants actually realized, one, how important it was for them to become proficient in coaching, and two, how they weren't really effective currently, right? So they were still coaching even at that level by giving tips and sharing their expertise instead of really asking provocative questions. And so when we notice that when emerging executives become better coaches, what happens is that their colleagues and their direct reports become better coaches as well. So helping foster that coaching culture, so one that encourages that experimentation and the growth at all levels. So that brings that acceleration, and that brings that speed to change and to develop and to stretch. Now, some of our clients have been asking for a long time to recommend best practices so that they can develop themselves the competencies of their direct reports. So some of you may know this already if you're our clients here on the line, but we just published something called the Better Leader Handbook, which is actually a neat toolbox of best practices to develop leaders on 13 competencies. So that gives leaders really the tools to help develop their leaders. So if ever you're interested, let us know. There's also lots of other resources out there to help you out with that. When we look at some common coaching scenarios, what could they be? And we won't spend too much time on this, as I'm sure that a lot of you know this already, but we're looking at that on the left-hand side, the high potential acceleration. And what that means is we're really looking at, in line with our theme today, accelerating readiness and growth with either identified hypo leaders or directors and emerging executives. It could also be business unit leaders or key functional leaders. And also, of course, we do coaching for redirection, optimization, and key transitions. But mainly looking at our focus today, we are effective, and we do have different clients that we help with that high potential acceleration. Because as I was saying earlier, it does take a village. And sometimes it takes that external perspective. Internal is awesome, but it does take that external perspective to help see things differently and grow really in a way that is a little bit more outside their comfort zone. If we look at our model at DDI for executive coaching, there's a few differentiators here. We've got, of course, that commit phase on the left-hand side, which is that investment phase. Kind of like with the personal trainer, right? I paid, he measured my body composition, we set goals together, we set that plan. So it's kind of the same thing, right? Initially, you'll have that investment. It could be a 360 or an assessment to sort of measure, the current state. Then you set a goal or two and you get your plan. And obviously setting your objectives, usually it's a 6-month sort of commitment, and usually twice a month. So that's something that we'll see, that I'm sure you're used to seeing in the market in terms of process. In terms of the advanced phase, we obviously ask coachees to sort of show up every couple of weeks. Usually they follow the plan, kind of like what I did with my personal trainer. The more you follow up and the more you also practice in between the coaching sessions, the more you advance. Now we look at the midpoint. We do a calibration, which is a process check, where we see, where are you at with your goals, and we look at do we need to readjust, right? Are you struggling with some issues, or maybe you're advancing faster than we thought you would? And this is the stage where we measure progress and see, are you actually stretching yourself as far as you can? Or sometimes are you taking it too easy on yourself, right? Or sometimes are you tiring yourself too much? So we kind of look at the measurement against the indicators, as Matt was saying earlier on, right? If they've done an assessment, then we kind of look at the progress from those indicators. And then we look at the measurement right at the end. So what is kind of that final progress? And has the ball been dropped somewhere? And if so, what can we do about that? And then we have that transition phase where, kind of like with my personal trainer, I had learned to work out with him for 6 months with a trainer, but I didn't know how to work out on my own, right? So had we just finished the training, had he not given me a plan, I probably would have stopped going to the gym, right? So it's making sure, and that's really one of our differentiators here at DDI, making sure that we help you and guide you in the transition, right? As an executive, is what do you need, right? So let's look at your 1 or 2 objectives for the next 6 months. How can we help you draft that plan to help you be successful in that transition, so that the work that we've done together doesn't just drop?
And I just want to actually plus on this one, because I was talking earlier about those critical moments where if you don't do it right, your investment is gonna drop. The value of your investment is gonna drop significantly. Yeah. So when it comes to coaching, executive coaching, that piece about the transition and having a plan and something to catch people's energy and fuel it after the actual engagement, I would say that's a big. I think that's a big problem right now, because a lot of the coaching that's going on out there, and I'm sure you guys may be coaches, use coaches. Like, this is something that's very common. However, many of those coaching engagements, they end. So the coaching ends, and you've done your coaching. Good. Right. Let's shake hands. Let's go. But that's a massive mistake, because if you don't have path for the person to kind of like keep practicing after the event, it's kind of like if you stop going to see my trainer. So anyway, so I just wanted to plus on this one, because it can be easily overlooked, and it's so often overlooked. But it's so easy to do something. Just need to do it and then get the person bought into it.
Exactly. And another example, what I was talking earlier on about that national training program, it's the exact same thing, right? So usually what tends to happen, and when we outsource as an organization, if you outsource, right, whether it's coaching, whether it's training programs at the executive level or otherwise, right, it's what do we do after with this? Right. So we'll measure, for example, with a training program, we'll measure 6 months after, and then we'll look at we do impact assessments, and we see what is the behaviors where they've moved the needle on. Are they more effective coaches? Do they drive results better? Those kinds of things. But then what? Right. So how can we help further their development so that creates that culture within your organization as well? So our last polling question: in your organization, how would you describe your coaching culture? So let's go to our last question here. All right, so is your coaching culture exceptional, strong, tenuous at best, or what's a coaching culture? Let's take a few moments to chime in here. I'll give you a few more seconds. All right, so let's end the polling. All right, tenuous at best, and what is a coaching culture? Sharing, I always forget to share the results. Thanks, Matt. I'm like so excited to see what you guys have. Okay, so I'm not too surprised about these results, and we'll see that really matches what we see in the field as well. So only 15% of respondents actually have, when we poll our clients, and also this is a study that is with the ICF and the Human Capital Institute, so only 15% of respondents have a strong coaching culture at their organization, right? So that kind of matches what we've just seen in the room here. But the thing is, among organizations with a strong coaching culture, about 3 in 5, so 61%, are also classified as high-performing organizations. And a strong coaching culture is correlated with most of the indicators of a high-performing organization, including success at a large-scale strategic change. And so what is a coaching culture? Well, we've got some elements for you here. But I mean, bottom line, it's really you creating a culture where people provide feedback to each other. They feel comfortable sharing their ideas, right? It's really a culture where people help each other out and coach each other. And so that really starts at the top with your executives being effective coaches and being able to implement that, and also being role models, right? So if they don't realize the importance of coaching, and if they don't realize, and if they're not great role models at it, it's going to be very difficult to implement that culture. So if you're interested in knowing more about coaching cultures, it's really not that difficult to implement, and the results are substantial. We do have a micro course. It's like 15 or 20 minutes on some tools and tips there if you're interested. There's a literature out there as well. You can pull some from the ICF if you guys are a member or whatnot. But really highly recommend that you look into that in whatever way you choose to, because it really does move the needle and make a difference to accelerate development.
And then they can also reach out to you, right?
Of course, absolutely. It will be my pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. So one of the last items that we wanted to share with you guys is an example of leadership development program that was designed for mid-level leaders. So we're talking about the same type of audience. So this was director and up, but not too high up. So I'd say senior manager to VP. And it was designed to build leadership capabilities as they align with operating in a more digital world. So it's not about building digital skills or more IT capabilities, but it's more the leadership skills and decision making and working with people that support making that happen, essentially. Because we see a lot of organizations right now that are doing this. And by the way, if you hear the sirens, that's because there's some kind of police truck, anyway, fire truck kind. So we're okay. The module here is something that we've launched so far in Asia because Asia is very fast into the digital transformation, especially in China. And right now we're looking at deploying this in North America. And for us here in Canada, we're seeing, okay, so how do we Canadianize this so to make sure that it's going to resonate well? But essentially what they've done in this was have a module that was at the start of this to build awareness, build insight for the leaders on what's changing in the world around digitalization, and then why is there a need for us to adjust our behaviors, and then what are the behaviors that are going to be needed for us to run a more effective organization. The whole design principle around this was to be very modular so that that the organization could pick and choose those that would work best within the different divisions. But this one here was they called it import module, but essentially it was the setting of the table type of thing for everyone to attend and participate. This was in person. I'm sure we could deploy this in virtual classrooms like we do with pretty much everything nowadays. But it was a lot about building the muscle strength and building the awareness for what is different and what needs to be different for mid-level leaders as it relates to operating in a more digital environment and to be able to compete essentially with pure digital plays that are eating up on their top line. So this was the import module focusing on myths, awareness, what are standards, what's different, and also what's not different, because not everything is different actually. So that's there. We wanted to bring your attention with the little time we still have is on examples of what were the modules in that program and the themes that they align to, because that could help you with your thinking around how are you going to build muscle strength for your emerging executives and in your mid-level leaders to be able to move the organization to become more digital and agile and fluid, and then have these leaders operate in a way that this is going to become more possible. So one of them is it's a quick module focusing on, so what are the new technologies and understanding what are the implications, and then how can you adjust the way that you operate based on those new technologies. Another module was on decision making, and it was called Agility 360 Decision Making, but essentially it's taking multiple data points into account when you are making a decision, and then not relying only on the usual data points that you were or that they were relying on to make those judgment calls, and have more of an outside-in type of analysis and leveraging more of what's going on in their market, in their environment, so that they could be most strategic with the scope of what they're responsible for. And essentially, I think the key theme for this one is outside in and multiple data points to make better decisions. The concept of bold empowerment was around taking more risk and then pushing down accountability with individuals that maybe in the past you would have refrained from doing this. But in the context of digitalization, and in the context also of how keen potentially less experienced individuals or emerging leaders are at taking on responsibility, that bolder empowerment becomes a really good tool to capitalize on their capabilities and their knowledge that sometimes some mid or senior level individuals don't have yet, just because of how tech savvy they tend to be. And also it becomes a tool for creating a more engaged environment and more engaged culture. And it's really pushing mid-senior level individuals on how to do that, and do that in a way that they're comfortable, and that it's not going to create more risk, and it's going to create value. Then there was a whole module on how to drive innovation, through the digital channels that you have, and then the collaboration tools that are out there to drive dialogue across the organization with using online platforms. Many of you will have LMSs that have those capabilities. There's all sorts of tools here. Here we use Yammer. That's one of the tools from Microsoft that for us works well. We're not selling it; just works for us. And using those to drive that and really capitalize on what's possible. Then there's a module that is about how to deal with the fact that there is uncertainty, and avoid going into the trap of overanalyzing, or the trap of cutting short on getting the right data. So just getting the right level of data and awareness of what's going on and what's the risk at play, and also what's the risk of not making a decision when you are uncertain, because not making a decision is making a decision by default because you're not moving forward. So there's a lot of thought challenges that came into play with that. Then there's another module that was around how to lead virtual teams and how to lead virtually. And then there's all sorts of tools out there that many of you may have, many of you may be looking into, but that help create this sense of community and a sense of how can you generate the teamwork that you would have had in a traditional environment where everybody is physically at the same place, but how to use those tools to make that more collaborative and effective. And then the last module that was part of that program is around how to drive diversity, how to get people to collaborate in a way that they respect each other, but also pull each other in for a diversity of point of views, and then end up being able to have a higher level of impact. Like there's so much data out there that better diversity, that better inclusion has a business impact that's very tangible. But in the context of digitalization and faster moving organizations, and then the context of multiple generations being in the workplace at the same time, this becomes even more critical if you want to reap all the rewards of the diverse environment that you have or you're seeking to have. So this is just an example, but we're going to import this from our Asian colleagues who've done a great job building that and deploying that on the other side of the planet. And it's coming up shortly in Canada. And if you're interested in this one, by the way, let us know, because we could look at some early adopter type of considerations and trying this out in some Canadian organizations, because it's doing great in Asia. So, we have some questions.
In the few minutes that we have, we're just going to answer some of your questions. And if after the webinar today you wish to contact us, feel free to do that via LinkedIn, either Matt, myself, or both of us. Right, so we're going to just answer some questions, and if you are free to go, if you wish. We only have a few minutes left, but we will be answering questions if you want to stay.
So, and thank you, Annie. So one of the question was on the 7 modules, if it's a package or if organizations can pick and choose. It is definitely on the second side, so organizations pick and choose. So the way our colleagues designed that and deployed that is it's all designed to be very modular. So there are some clients who would deploy the whole thing, but over a period of time, so not in just one chunk. And then they would integrate that into a learning journey, so which often would be their leadership learning journey, and there would be some digitalization content, and this becomes the pieces of the puzzle that ends up building up the muscle strengths that relate to digital leadership. So that's the answer for this one. There was another question around challenges faced by organizations who are in a fast growth mode. Obviously, we've got a lot of clients who are in that mode. So,
all of them.
Well, so the fastest growth organizations, the top 3 challenges that we see anyway. So one is going to be pretty obvious to many of you. It's how to attract, retain, and onboard enough. Well, first individual contributors, but then leaders to manage those people. So it's just a pipeline for attracting hiring the right ones, and then growing them to a place where they're productive now, that's super sensitive and critical, because they can't hire fast enough. The problem is often they end up hiring and then they lose people super fast because they don't necessarily hire the right ones, and then it becomes this turning table.
And the onboarding too. They don't onboard them well, and so people are kind of lost looking for what they have to do, and they're not growing fast enough.
The speed to productivity and retention of people ends up being a big problem. The other big problem is often the fast growth organizations. They have a lot of folks that get moved into frontline leadership roles, supervisory roles really fast. And because they don't necessarily have programs to grow those capabilities fast, they end up having individual contributors in leadership roles, and they're becoming dysfunctional, and they're just, they don't know how to coach, they don't know how to engage people, they don't know how to grow skills, and they would go back to their old skills. So that's a lot of the kind of work that we end up doing.
And you also have frontline leaders or mid-level that are parachuted to executive roles and aren't ready for that either. And think like frontline leaders and micromanage and
and they don't know how to take a governance or like enterprise stance to things. So I would say that's probably the third key challenge.
Great questions, guys. We have another one. We're just reading that.
I think the other question we had was similar. So it's like, what kind of challenges face? I think, like, essentially what we're seeing is a lot of that digital transformation. That's why we want to bring this into Canada, because it seems like our Asian colleagues were kind of ahead of us, but we're in the same team, so we can leverage their stuff and make it Canadian.
That's right.
And then, so digital transformation, the speed of change, speed of movement, and then able to move up to the kind of challenges that come with being an executive when you've been a early career executive or frontline leader for most of your career. And so it's like driving movement and driving readiness. That's a very big challenge.
That's right.
And right now it's all about speed, and it's all about agility, and it's all about dealing with that digital transformation. Because there's a lot of disruption coming in. Canada has been somewhat secured, I find, as a market. But now it's changing, and a lot of our clients, what we're seeing is they're accelerating the speed at which they're catching up.
That's right. And I would end by saying also helping to create that support system, whether it's a coaching culture or whatever you want to call it, but creating that support system around coming back to our topic, emerging executives, just making sure that they are supported, because sometimes they are parachuted in those roles, they're not ready, sometimes they don't even have the life experience, and so just really creating that support system in whichever way you do that.
Yep. Awesome. So with that said, we're out of time.
Thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Annie. So with that said, thank you, everyone. We'll be on the lookout for the recording, and
have a good one, guys. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Cheers.